Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you very much, Alyssa. And really, I'm just going to say a very big thank you to Alyssa and the Custom Fleet team for their manaakitanga, for hosting us. And they've been a long-time supporter of Drive Electric, so we feel very fortunate to have you as part of our ecosystem, and thank you very much for your support tonight. It means a lot. Just as a quick update on Drive Electric, we are seeing the Minister next week, so if you've got any thoughts you'd like us to share, please come up and see us after the presentation. We've also got a few things in the pipeline that we're looking at for next year. We're looking to re-release the State of the Nation report. Next year we're also looking at having an EV summit and some EV awards. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, either as a sponsor or we're setting up a working group on that, please reach out to Dean or one of the Drive Electric board. That would be fabulous. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming this evening. We really appreciate it. It's great to see some old faces and some new ones, and we look forward to these fabulous speakers. So I'll hand back to Alyssa to introduce. Thank you.
I just want to clarify as well, I didn't do anything for tonight. So it's a big thank you to Rylan Rebello. He's taken the lead and the team here. So well done, and thank you to Rylan. So we've got two speakers this evening. We've firstly got Seth Hochhauser from Autofleet, who'll be sharing strategies and best practices for optimising EV fleets, and then Leonard Tham from Custom Fleet, who will be giving an overview of the V2G market in Australia. Seth, over to you.
Oh, you didn't realize it'd be a magic show as well. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you to Custom Fleet and Drive Electric for having me. It's my first time in New Zealand. It's definitely my first time speaking in New Zealand, so please bear with me. And Rylan, I think a big thank you for putting this together. So today I wanted to speak about Autofleet, kind of some of the work that we're doing in the electrification space, some of the optimization capabilities that we're bringing to our clients, and hopefully at the very least you'll find it interesting, but also potentially some of the specific applications that we're doing might be relevant to your fleets or your partners in the space. So just very briefly on who Autofleet is, we're an optimization company that was founded about 7 or 8 years ago, focused on providing a strategic technology partner to fleets and mobility operators of all shapes and sizes. As of 10 months ago, we've become part of the Custom Fleet and Element Fleet family. So now we're kind of being a strategic technology partner for both Custom Fleet, their clients as well, providing them the same capabilities that we're bringing to many of our individual clients. So how do we support electrification today? We think about it in a few different areas. One is really about simulations and fleet planning. So how can you use fleet data, and how do you use optimization capabilities to provide the best insights into fleet configurations? So what is the correct, let's say, fleet size that I need to support my operations? Into charging infrastructure. So what type of chargers do I need? Where should I put them in order to support my fleet? And then additionally, within live operations, having the EV compatible capabilities to manage the fleet on the road. Today, we're doing all these capabilities with one of the most advanced fleets in the world. Waymo is an autonomous vehicle and EV OEM and ride-hailing service that is now grown to actually be the second largest ride-hailing service in San Francisco, ahead of Lyft. Right? We've reached that point of inflection within AV and EV capabilities. And we are doing all of their fleet planning using our simulator to help them identify the correct charging capabilities and operational rollouts. So let's talk about some of the dynamics that go into fleet electrification. Right? We all are aware of kind of the driving factors behind it, the potential benefits. Right? Of course, there's some push from, let's say, government mandates to to shift and realize some of these benefits. But ideally, right, the goal is, well, at the end of the day, to reduce TCO, right, and be able to capture some of the economic benefits that are coming from electrification, reducing carbon emissions as well from a sustainability perspective. But on the other hand, there are specific operational complexities that arise with EVs, right? They're just things, right? Charging an electric vehicle and having limited range to a certain extent are just factors that aren't present in gas-powered fleets. And so understanding how do we manage, right, these two competing types of realities? How do we ensure that we're capturing the benefits, but still having strategies in place to make sure that you're not reducing any of the other components of your fleets, of your operations, of your personnel? So generally speaking, we could understand kind of the trade-offs between, let's say, an EV fleet and an ICE fleet along the terms of utilization. So at least at the current point, EVs tend to have a higher upfront cost than an EV fleet. But there's a curve at which point the more you use these fleets, you should be capturing kind of a lower variable cost. And at some point, right, the total cost of ownership or the financial kind of trade-off makes sense from an EV perspective. So generally speaking, right, fleets and mobility operators are trying to drive utilization using EVs because that's going to be the best case scenario, right? You're getting the social and sustainability benefits, but now you're also realizing a financial benefit as well. Now, that is assuming, that curve I just showed assumes business as usual, right? You're using the same type of strategies, the same approach, the same usage of vehicles as you did before you kind of transitioned to EV, right? But in reality, you can completely transform the equation and transform this type of analysis using various optimizations. So that is one of the kind of core strategies that Autofleet partners with our clients to support, right? How do we change this TCO metric, and how do we kind of reduce the going forward assumptions, right? And there's various ways that we help with that, right? Regarding, let's say, fleet and infrastructure planning, as well as in live operations. So for one way we do that is there's a certain, obviously, upfront cost associated with charging infrastructure, right? That's a high CapEx type of deployment, real estate, hardware, et cetera. And so one of the optimizations that we run is identifying where is the optimal number of charging points and what's the optimal type of chargers to use, which supports the needs of my fleet. Now, obviously, if you make that decision in a very optimal way, you're going to be able to reduce your overall upfront costs. Because ideally, you're installing the minimum number of chargers that are the right speed and solving for that equation to kind of reduce the upfront CapEx. And that's a case study that we did with a fleet in Singapore. They had 20,000 vehicles that they were managing a taxi service. And we helped identify where were the optimal locations of these charging points, types of chargers to help them reduce their overall upfront spend. Another way that you can kind of reshape the decision making and the thought process behind the fleet is how do you just drive utilization across your fleet? So one way we see a lot of our clients trying to attempt this is from shifting from obviously a larger fleet to a smaller fleet, right? If you're able to increase the utilization across a smaller number of vehicles, one, you're decreasing your fleet footprint to begin with, but you're also then increasing the mileage and gaining the benefits across the EVs and their variable cost. So using simulations and fleet data to identify where are these underutilized assets allows some of our customers to go ahead and shift to, let's say, a 1-to-1 fleet to driver ratio to a more shared fleet or motor pool or corporate car share. So that's how we support them upfront, helping them identify which of these vehicles are fit or have potential to be right-sized. Then in live operations, that kind of creates an additional level of complexity, right? Now, instead of every driver having their own vehicle, which they don't mind if it's dirty and they use it every day, you're now sharing it across sharing it across drivers. And now you have an additional administrative burden, right? Logging who's using it, making sure that those are cleaned at a certain ratio. And so we help our customers in live deployments by providing them a motor pool platform to manage essentially the shared fleet. The other way that we help our customers really transition from or move up that curve to increase utilization and downsize the fleet is through route optimization, and specifically from EV compatible route optimization. Right? If you are transitioning to EV and using the vehicles in the same way, you'll realize benefits. But again, if you can increase the usage, the financial picture and the benefits are accelerated. So how do we do that? So there's two factors. One, there's just general optimized routing and scheduling. So you can imagine a technician fleet that has a certain amount of work orders that they have to complete in a day, and they have a limited number of drivers to complete them. One of our core applications of the platform is generating an optimization algorithm to essentially assign the most amount of work to the least number of drivers. And obviously that corresponds with a smaller fleet and higher utilization. This is an example of that exact use case. We were looking at a field service fleet and looked at across 10 depots to understand which depot should be electrified first, which one was capable and fit for electrification. And one of the analyses that we ran was taking all of their work orders, taking their driver schedules, their driver shifts, running it through our route optimization platform, and giving them a perspective of this is how many drivers you use that day to meet your operational need. But in an optimized scenario, you could have done the same work with 22% of a smaller fleet. Right? So using the data, using the actual fleet operational needs, this gives the fleet managers confidence when they're making that decision on how to downsize. And then with a smaller fleet, giving them the tools they need to manage that well so they don't have that trade-off where they now have a worse operational performance. So we kind of discussed kind of more of the planning piece. So you have infrastructure planning, right? Making sure that you have the right number of chargers, the right location of chargers. We talked a little bit about the usage of the vehicles itself, making sure you have an ability to downsize fleet and share fleet if necessary. This piece is more about, okay, now I have my fleet out and about. How do I charge it in an effective manner? And what charging strategy should I employ to ensure that the driver experience isn't too painful and ensure that the vehicles are ready when they need to be? So this is a nice, cute graph, I guess, that illustrates various charging strategies, right? So you have what we call naive charging, which is use a vehicle until a predefined cutoff point, and then go ahead and charge it. But that perspective is only really looking at just the vehicle. And in reality, these vehicles are all being used for something, right? All of the people, all the ones in this room have fleet needs, right? Whether it's a sales fleet or a technician fleet or a transport fleet, et cetera. So one of the optimizations that Autofleet supports is layering in the demands on the fleet and then having that interact with the charging schedules. So if we're using demand prediction to assess, okay, I believe that I'll need a certain number of active vehicles at a time of day, I'll use the low peak periods and send drivers to charge during that point. All right, so we're aligning the supply curve with the demand curve to ensure that the overall operational integrity isn't challenged by the need to go and have downtime associated with charging. It's a similar idea with depot-based charging. So using demand prediction to assess how many vehicles will I need at which times, then helps inform the depot kind of charging strategy, which vehicles at which windows, which vehicles even at which depot, if that's part of the decision. Some of the work that we do for our customers is around just making decisions on home charging versus sometimes even public charging versus installation of private chargers. And then understanding what is the various trade-offs between obviously upfront costs, ongoing costs, and the driver experience, right? The difference between being able to take your vehicle home and plugging it in versus having to, take it to a public charger or private charging network. So this is an example of how we will use the fleet data and our infrastructure data to help map out those decisions, right? What is the driver experience going to look like if they use public chargers, right? How long will it take them to drive? How much time will they be spending driving to and from these locations as part of their day? What if we wanted to, save on costs and we minimize the number of private installations? What does that impact look like on the driver experience? And then the same idea, well, what if we want to give the driver experience the best possible one, right, and give them charges at home? What is the corresponding impact on their day-to-day lives? So using the fleet data to actually give the real insights of what life will look like post a transition provides the confidence that our partners need to either make decisions or sometimes help encourage their drivers to accept EVs, which sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. Maybe I'll kind of end in this slide, but I kind of mentioned all the various ways that we support and kind of use optimization strategies to impact how the fleet operates day to day. One of the core pieces, right, I mentioned the TCO up front, is being able to provide that insight, right, from a purely financial perspective. What do I need to have from, let's say, a lease price to capture the benefits for a TCO? And so this is the type of output that we'll provide for our customers, right? What is the break-even lease point that you need to have in order to capture the upsides from the TCO of your fleet? So if I was to summarize, right, I think really the way Autofleet is approaching the electrification world is really a data-first approach, right? Giving fleet managers and drivers the confidence they need to embrace this much-needed transition, providing the optimization capabilities to help make this transition a very successful and robust one, and really providing our fleet partners the innovative tools and strategies they need to really help bring this very important initiative into the future. So thank you, everyone, for your time. Appreciate it.
All right. Hi, everyone. We've got a full house. Kia ora. I'm going to start tonight with a quiz. Can anybody tell me what's the cheapest home battery on sale today? Home battery. No. Anybody? It's a GWM Aura. Yeah. For the low price of $39.90, you can get 63 kilowatts of usable energy. So, 2 months ago, a UK retailer, energy company, released a V2G and vehicle lease bundle with BYD. It's got the car, a V2G charger installed in your home, free charging for the life of the lease, and includes all servicing and maintenance. So tonight, we're going to talk about what V2G is, what it promises, why it's important, and where we are in terms of the journey. Now, I have to caveat this by saying this is an Australian experience. So, and not being an electrical engineer myself, and I know there are many learned people out here that are in the technical field. If you have any technical questions for me, the door is that way. But okay. Right, so what's V2G? In the today world, power goes in one direction, from the grid to the plug to the car. In a V2G world, otherwise known as bidirectional charging, or BD, BDI, whatever, it goes both ways, right? So it can go to the car, and it can also come out from the car to charge, to power the home, or even be returned to the grid. That's all it is. Why is this important? So in Australia, the generation mix is changing very, very quickly, all right? We are the most successful country in terms of the deployment of rooftop solar. The renewable mix today at certain times of the day and in certain states can be 100%. So South Australia is an example, right? Generally speaking, we're probably at about 40 to 43% renewable mix as of early this year. So that's changing. As it changes, it becomes more and more weather dependent. So the sun ain't shining all the time and the wind isn't blowing, right? The generation power from time of day to season changes significantly. And that's what we're seeing now. From 2010, 2011 to 2023, 2024, you can see some of that variation in the NEM. This is the National Electricity Market. So for those of you who are not familiar, the East Coast states and Tasmania are tied into what we call the National Electricity Market, and that's basically the wholesale market that is traded. So the instability, rather the variability in generation drives different pricing signals across the market. In times of very high generation and potentially low demand, prices fall. And when it's, when there's a lot of demand and not a lot of generation, prices can skyrocket. Now, the average EV, the average EV holds about 60, EV battery holds 60 kilowatt hours of energy, give or take. That's enough to power a home for, 2 to 3 days if you're running the ovens, maybe a week if you're not. So there's a tremendous amount of potential locked up in those batteries, storage potential, right? The mixture of storage and renewables are really important, right? These things go hand in hand. So when the sun is not shining, you can store the power and then use them in the battery. By 2030, there's estimated to be about 300,000 V2G capable vehicles on Australian roads. And by 2050, that's estimated to be about 2.6 million. So in 2050, it's estimated that there will be 4x the amount of storage on the roads versus our total NEM energy needs, right? So storage will outstrip this if we can tap into it. So where are the value streams? There are 4 basically identified value streams. The first is energy arbitrage. You saw those price signals. There are big differences when the price spikes. So charging or storing the energy when it's cheap and then discharging it when it's expensive, right? It's a basic thing. Network support. So the distribution networks kind of like it because you're not putting strain on the grid, and in many cases it can help alleviate stress on the grid. So if there's a lot of demand, there's a big demand spike, and batteries can release the energy into the grid, then you're not putting additional strain on it. Alternative power supply. So I don't know if any of you remember during the tsunami in Japan, they strung a bunch of Nissan Leafs up to power the town, right? During the Texas blackouts, Ford F-150 Lightnings powered houses. Right? There was a story of a mum that used their BYD Atto 3 to power her son's dialysis machine during a blackout. Right? And closer to home, actually, this is funny, our own procurement leader had a blackout just the day before Christmas with his fridge full of groceries, and he plugged it into his EV6, right? So Christmas was saved. The last is what we call FCAS, which is a frequency response. That's probably that is a value stream, but it's probably less important in this context. A lot of that seems to be, so essentially it contributes to grid stability as well in terms of the frequency. But that's taken up by by more like fast reacting large grid scale batteries. So, but it's somewhere where, I don't know if anybody has read the literature around the trial that I think ANU did with some Nissan Leafs as well, around FCAS, and they generated quite a lot of profit. So, okay. All right. So we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the stakeholders and the perspectives that they're coming from. There are a number of moving parts, right? And everything needs to work together for everybody to benefit. And progress in each area is different. So first of all, standards and certification. So there are a couple of things roughly that you kind of need to know. For anything to be connected to the grid, it needs to be grid certified. And there is a certification standard for that. So in Australia and New Zealand, that's 4777.1, right? Think of it as, if you have solar, you've got an inverter, and the inverter feeds in electricity into the grid. That inverter needs to be certified. So similarly, whatever bidirectional charger you're using will need to have that certification. Now, the certification process for the charger is in progress now. So chargers are starting to come into the Australian market that are certified. There are not many. The certification process is new, and some of the labs are not tooled up. But I think over time, we're going to get more and more chargers that are certified. So that's fine. You do need to communicate with the chargers. So there is, to be able to send the signal or the command to the charger to charge or discharge. Typically, this will be supported in Open Charge Point Protocol or OCPP. But you need a certain version to do that, right? So recommended 2.1, I think 2.01 will do as well. But many chargers today are only support 1.6. So there's something that we need to think about. If it's not upgradable, then that asset won't be able to realize some of these benefits. Finally, the charger and the car need to communicate, right? And so the OEM or the vehicle OEM and the charger needs to talk, and that language is ISO 15118. Right? So they need to communicate. So there are a couple of things that need to move together. Not everybody supports everything now, so it's a little bit of a patchwork, but these standards need to be applied. Now, it's important to note that grid standards are quite country specific, right? So when you're thinking about connecting a vehicle to the Australian or the New Zealand grid, and they need to be certified to a particular standard, we have to think about whether or not the OEMs will want to do that. Right, because each locality will have their own grid standards. For a small auto market, that might be a challenge. All right, the next stakeholder is the distribution networks. Now, generally, I mentioned that they don't mind that. They quite like it. They are gearing up. There are a couple of big DNSPs in Australia now that are supporting V2G. This is real. You can actually apply for it. You can buy the hardware, get that installed, and you're ready to go, right? So we see more and more distribution networks supporting this. From what I'm told, there's a little bit of work that needs to be done. If you think about the tariff structure of how networks charge for utilizing the network, because they're quite fixed today, right? So they don't necessarily match the demand curve throughout the day. So that needs to be adjusted a little bit to something called dynamic tariffs. So your price for what you use, essentially. Those of you who have solar, you'll know you have export limits as well. So the export limits, again, are fixed, right? So you have a fixed pricing structure, and you're trying to overlay something that's quite flexible, right? So I think This dynamic tariff structure will need to be introduced at some point in time. I think there are some networks. There's a network in, I think it's South Australian Power Networks, that's going to introduce that, and then more and more will start to look at that. So there's a little bit of work on the network side, but that seems to be progressing quite well. The hardware. So for those of you familiar with charging, there's AC and DC charging. Currently, all chargers available in Australia are DC, right? And they tend to be much more expensive than AC charging. Over time, that's going to come down, but the holy grail really is AC V2G, because you're thinking that, you know, the equipment's going to be a lot cheaper, right? But this is certainly a barrier today. What we're seeing, and this is not a quote by any means, is, you know, these chargers are $10,000 and up. So they do cost quite a bit of money. There is also the plug standard. Up to now, a lot of the trials have been using a CHAdeMO plug on Nissan Leafs and I think Mitsubishi cars. Now, going forward, because plug standards are going to have been standardized on CCS, that's going to be a challenge, and we have this potentially stranded pool of, you know, customers that have these cars that will be unable to access this. Right? So we've got to kind of think through that. What's the migration plan to get them across? Now, we come to the last bit, the vehicle OEMs. What shall I say? Nobody's come out and basically supported V2G, right? Many vehicle OEMs today support V2L, and from a technical perspective, they can support V2G. It's just that they haven't come out and said that. Why? Well, there are certainly impacts to vehicle warranties, and I think they're still working through how that impacts things from a warranty perspective. Because, you know, it is the cheapest home battery, right? So what happens if you're cycling through your battery and your car's done 0 kilometers? So that brings us to my last slide, and I'll finish with 10 points just to kind of think about it. So what do we need to consider as business fleet owners? So I spoke about the technical compatibility, right? So DC versus AC, CCS versus CHAdeMO. We need to think through that, assuming that all the equipment you have is compatible with all those standards that I just mentioned earlier. Network flexibility. Now, probably not a conversation for a fleet manager, but certainly in the for those of you who are paying the power bills, how are network tariffs priced? And then from a consumer perspective or, you know, small business perspective, you're feeding back into the grid. How are you going to, you know, how is that priced, right? What are the limits to that? Because if you've got a very small export limit, even if you've got all the power in the batteries, you won't be able to export it back into the grid. So that flexibility from the network needs to be there. Hardware cost definitely needs to come down. Ideally, AC V2G, if not, you know, DC units still cost a fair whack. The role of the vehicle OEMs. What will the battery warranty cover versus not? You know, how will that affect things like residual values, right? Warranties and residual values. I will just mention one small thing on point 4 as well, which is the risk of vehicle. I don't know if you have, I'm sure you have some vehicle OEMs here. Don't do this. The risk of a walled garden approach to OEMs, right? And so, for example, I'll give an example of one OEM who shall not be named. They have batteries, they have chargers, and they have cars, right? Now, to access that ecosystem, there is a toll to be paid. So the risk is that this doesn't become an open standard, and you've got car manufacturers and charger manufacturers creating the ecosystem. The operational needs of the fleet, you just heard Seth, you know, we need to be able to match the use cases of the duty cycles with this opportunity, if there's an opportunity here, right? We don't know. But that data needs to be understood, right? You can't be discharging energy when, you know, your drivers need to be out on the road. What's the mechanism to get customers to participate? Super important, the customer experience, right? There are a number of companies that are jumping onto the bandwagon now. I don't know if you've heard of an Australian company called Amber. Right? So Amber's done some really cool stuff in this space at the consumer level. It's easy, you know. If you go on YouTube, you'll see all these YouTubers saying, "Oh, I made $200 today." Oh, great, you know. But they've done a good job with that. It's got its bugs, but it works, right? So what's at a fleet level? What does that look like? Who do we partner with to be able to start to unlock some of this value? Is there money to be made? Big question mark, right? It's early days. It favors the early mover. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity today, but as more and more participants enter the market, does that get eroded? So I suppose it's a bit of a wait and see to see whether or not is it too much effort for too little coin. The other thing is, members of the public, small business, they can't access the wholesale energy market. You need a partner to do that. So when the value is created, how is that going to be distributed, right? Will consumers or businesses enjoy the benefit of that? Or does that value get apportioned disproportionately, right, to the VPP provider, for example? We don't know. End user behavior. For it to work, you need to plug in the car. Simple thing. But you'd be surprised how many people don't do it. So that's something that needs to be worked through. Early adopters, great, they're all on board. But, when you get to the mass market, particularly in the fleet space, that's a key thing. And number 10, on July the 1st, the Australian government launched their Cheaper Home Batteries program. In the 1 month of that launch of the program, 20,000 home batteries have been installed. That is an enormous amount of batteries, right? That's the first month. At this rate, not only are there a lot of batteries, but the average battery size is increasing. So before the program, the average battery size in the home was about 10 kilowatt hours, right? It's upwards of 12, 15, 17 kilowatt hours now. So it's a much bigger, you're getting almost a 2x increase in battery size and the scale of batteries. The advantage of this is that the battery is stationary and it's at home. Right? You don't have this issue to try and match the duty cycle of the vehicle. So remains to be seen what impact this will have. At the current run rate, it looks like they're going to run out of money well before the end of the program. So in another 18, 24 months, they'll run out of money, right? In which case they would have put, it's the equivalent of, what they've done in a month is the equivalent of one large grid scale battery per month. So you can see the progression of that. So number 10, I think, could shape the market in unexpected ways. And that's me. Thank you.
So just a very big thank you once again to the team at Custom Fleet, and thank you very much, Seth and Leonard, for your excellent presentations. That was fantastic. Lots of learning for everyone in the room. And thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. We will be making a donation to Trees That Count for our speakers this evening. So a native tree will be planted in Aotearoa as our koha, and saying thank you for coming and thank you for supporting us. We really appreciate it, and everyone have a lovely evening. Thank you.